Welcome to Mocktails and Masterpieces with the Indianapolis Chamber Orchestra. Today's episode is sponsored by Anthony Team Realty. Today's episode of Mocktails and Masterpieces originally aired on May 17th, 2021.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you, to have you tune in once again for tonight's Mocktails and Masterpieces. We're joined by our great friend once again, David Murray, who has a performance to share to you tonight of Beethoven's Third Cello Sonata, A Major Cello Sonata, Opus 69. It's always a joy for me to talk to David. David, great to see you virtually here. How are you?
I'm great, Matthew. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this again. It's great to be able to share music tonight as well.
And particularly Beethoven, you know, as we were chatting before we came on here, this was set to be a monumental year of celebration of Beethoven's music, the 250th birthday of Beethoven, you know, one of these colossal, you know, revered figures in Western music, you know, and of course, so many people were saying, oh, great, we get to hear more Beethoven. We hear Beethoven all the time, but there's a reason why we celebrate these composers that have had profound impact on the trajectory of music, and particularly Beethoven, who was such a revolutionary. So I'm delighted that we're able to share with our patrons who are tuning in this recording that you just recently did here of this transcription of Beethoven's Third Cello Sonata. And you know, perhaps now we can just talk about Beethoven for a moment here, since it seems like all of the performances of his music, you know, at least in concert halls, will be shuttered, you know, for the entire anniversary year that we projected. We had his 8th symphony, but the chamber orchestra, we performed it in January, so we were lucky to get that in. But we had, you know, a concert that I was looking forward to probably more than any other in many years, a concert version of his only opera, Fidelio, which unfortunately we had to cancel, hoping to bring back in a couple seasons. But this composer is so revolutionary in the trajectory of music. Like I said, the Third Symphony is the, you know, many can consider the first piece of the Romantic era, or that piece that introduced, you know, such a broad stroke of penmanship across every symphony and every sonata and quartet that he wrote, a real revolutionary. But we're going to talk specifically about his relationship with the double bass tonight, since you're performing. He knew a very famous Italian virtuoso bass player, which really helped to shape, you know, his image or his vision for what the instrument was capable of. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit, you know, about your impressions of Beethoven as a composer, but specifically about Dragonetti, the bass virtuoso.
Oh yeah, well, and I mirror your sort of loss of the Fidelio performance, because I was really looking forward to that too. It's an amazing opera, and I think it really is part of Beethoven's inspiration. The whole story was real Beethoven, because he loved the idea of good triumphing over evil, and he wrote that into so many works like the Ninth Symphony and the Fifth Symphony. Beethoven as a composer is really amazing, and this particular sonata, we'll hear the first movement tonight, but this particular sonata, when you step back and just look at the way it's put together structurally, it's amazing. It's perfect. When we're playing it, I mean, no matter how many times we rehearse it and go over it, I can't but be just in awe of how perfect a piece of music it is. Just the way it's structured, the way every note fits together, everything balances out. It's really just amazing. Now, Domenico Dragonetti is a name that's maybe not as famous as Beethoven, but he was a virtuoso 19th century Italian bassist. He traveled all over Europe. He lived to be quite elderly. He was about 83 when he died. And really phenomenal player, really brought the instrument up, brought the level of bass playing up. He's one of our real true virtuosos. And he did some composition himself, but he also worked with Beethoven. There is a little segment in Thayer's Life of Beethoven, so we can really hold that it's true, a true account, that he played the G minor cello sonata with Beethoven at the piano. And at the end, Beethoven was so impressed that he jumped up and gave Dragonetti a big hug. So we know that Beethoven approved. So that kind of opened the door. Saying, well, if Beethoven liked this, he'll probably like this piece. So I have no qualms about playing Beethoven's cello sonata on the bass. Has to be good, of course. We have to try our best to make it sound as good as a cello would sound. But it's such amazing music. I think that's part of the reason that we play transcriptions. We don't have original compositions by Beethoven or Brahms or Bach in our bass repertoire. So being able to play those transcriptions brings us a little closer to those masterpieces, which is really great. So that's part of the reason I just love this whole sonata. I'm preparing it for a recital in September here at Butler. And so I thought, well, why don't we just record it, or at least the first movement of it. I'm missing all these performances in the summer, the performances we were doing with the ICO, and so many other things got canceled. I thought, well, let's make our own performance. And Kathy Bringerud and I got together and rehearsed, and we've done a couple of recordings this summer, one being this Beethoven. So really fun to do.
Well, we're delighted that you're sharing this with us. You know, we're talking, you know, I want to come back to the topic of transcriptions, which you've done so many brilliantly. But, you know, about Beethoven the Revolutionary, not only the structure, you know, of a sonata allegro form, you know, movement and these things, which, you know, he was so brilliant at in forward thinking, but the instrumentation and orchestration of his symphonies, you know, the Fifth Symphony with the introduction of trombones, piccolo, and contrabassoon for the first time, you know, the thematic, programmatic nature theme in the Pastoral Symphony No. 6, and of course the introduction of the human voice. But one thing specifically about, you know, his ingenuity is the independent line of the double bass, because for classical composers, Mozart and Haydn, and even before that, the double bass was always married to the cello part, playing at the octave, for example. But he gave great independence to the bass line, which you were saying again before we came on, that, you know, made double basses' lives that much more difficult, because now the bass parts became very, and I'm thinking, of course, of the great recitative in the Ninth Symphony. Well, what are bass parts like in a bass symphony, in a Beethoven symphony?
Yeah, it's funny, you can see the change as you go through. The first couple of symphonies, the bass and cello part are pretty much the same. By the time we get to the Ninth Symphony, there's a lot of difference. Not to mention the fact that in the Ninth Symphony, some of that stuff is like incredibly difficult. It goes really high up. It's really fast, lots of notes. You know, if we got paid by the note, we'd be millionaires with Beethoven 9. It's really, I think, a sort of a, I wouldn't call it maybe a tribute to Dragonetti, but I think Beethoven was inspired by Dragonetti, saying, oh, well, if he can do this, maybe other bass players can. And so he really pushed the level for us. Beethoven's in the Ninth Symphony has that recitative in the fourth movement that's cello and bass at the beginning. And that's a mirror of what the baritone will sing when he comes in. So it's interesting that he gave it to cello and bass and not just cello. It's really a solo line. It's a melodic line, and really important for this whole structure of the whole movement. And there is an urban legend, I'm not sure that it's true, that some people have said that Dragonetti alone, solo bass, no cello, no bass section, just solo Dragonetti, played the recitative at the early performance, the first performance of Beethoven 9. I'm not 100% sure that that story is true, but it makes for a great story.
It makes for a great story nonetheless. I mean, we're talking about an instrument here that has been the, you know, the foundation of a string section, really of an orchestra, you know, since the Baroque era. But it has had a growing independence because of the virtuosity of so many performers. Dragonetti, you know, Battistini. We could look at the current composer bassists, you know, Edgar Meyer and you know, Gary Kars, of course, who you're very much affiliated with, but have written so many different works. Kusevitsky, the conductor bassist, for example. Now the instrument is capable of doing anything that, you know, then performers like yourself who can play anything that's put in front of them. But the instrument is interesting, you know, for somebody who maybe doesn't know the instrument very, very well, that there are a couple of different instruments that you play on for specific purposes. I mean, I have one violin and I use it for everything, but, you know, even right behind you, you have two different instruments, but maybe you could tell us about the different instruments that you own and the different purposes that you use them for.
Yeah, it's interesting. As bass players, we're kind of a hybrid instrument to start with, and then there's several different tunings. I've got two instruments back here, you can see, and the one that's sitting up right here beside my shoulder, That has a different tuning than the one that's sitting on the floor over here. The tuning with the bass was always a little bit, well, it was always in flux, because we're a shape that's more like a gamba, which is a precursor to the modern string instruments, violin, viola, cello. So we're kind of a hybrid instrument, because eventually we got the 4 strings like those have, but some bass players use 5 strings. Some use a different tuning even than I use. Some people put on a high C string, some people tune in fifths. These 2 tunings are a step apart. The one that's lying on the floor is the standard orchestral tuning, which is from the top G, D, A, E. But this solo bass, I have it tuned so the top string is an A, and it's A, E, B, F sharp. Tuned in fourths like the other one is, but a step higher. Wow. So what I like about that tuning is that it's a little brighter, it speaks a little more quickly, it gives a little more projection for solo playing. So I use this bass for solo playing, and that bass I would use more for orchestra playing. I have a 3rd instrument at home that is tuned like the one on the floor. I use that in the ICO and for chamber music. This one that's on the floor, I use very often when I'm working with students, because it's the same tuning as their basses generally are. But this is also my travel bass, this one on the floor. It comes apart. So the neck slides off and you pack it up in one case, and then you put the body of the bass in the other. So the case is only about this high instead of, you know, all the way up to the ceiling. So when you show up at an airport to fly, they accept it more readily than those big trunks that we used to use. So it's great having 3 basses now. I didn't always.
You have a name for that bass, by the way, don't you?
Oh yeah, I name all my instruments. The one that I use in the chamber orchestra has a lion head carved into the top instead of a scroll. So his name's Leonardo da Bassi. This one behind me here has a long neck. Hermione, after Hermione Gingold, the English actress who had a very long neck, who just spoke like this. So that's Hermione. And the one on the floor over here, because the neck comes off, that's Marie from Marie Antoinette. But unlike Marie, she gets recapitated upon arrival. So there's a happy end to that story.
There's a happy end. Before we set up this Beethoven sonata, which we're going to play for our patrons tonight, do want to encourage anybody who's tuning in to bring us some questions via Facebook. We'll come back afterwards. We got a couple other things, interesting things to talk about here. But we have this great Beethoven segment here with David Murray. David, I want you to set it up because it's an important work. I'm thinking of so many of the violin sonatas that were from Beethoven's early period, where he was still very much under the influence of Haydn. His middle period is where he really, began to become this revolutionary that we know of Beethoven. And this particular sonata is from 1808, I believe, the same year that the Fifth Symphony, the Sixth Symphony, and the Choral Fantasy. So this is were premiered. So this was a very busy and a very important historical period for Beethoven here. Maybe you can set this sonata up, and then we'll go into it.
Yeah, it's his 3rd of 5 sonatas for the cello, the middle one. A major, very, bright, happy key. I remember I've played the G minor too. It's a little heavy, depressing. This piece is so optimistic, the whole sonata. It's just brilliant. The first movement is so full of life, so full of energy, all very positive. There's a great scherzo in the second movement, and the last movement starts with a slow introduction. That's kind of the slow movement of the piece, and then goes into a, really fast, lots of runs in the last movement. There's enough in the first movement. But very bright, optimistic. It's so lyrical. It's so melodic. It starts off with the melody just in the bass, and then the piano joins in, and they converse. They share the melodies back and forth. So we just have the first movement here this evening. Hope you enjoy it, and it's at cello pitch. So if you hear a cello play it, it'll be at the same pitch level.
David Murray, Kathy Brigren, Beethoven's Cello Sonata number 3, the first movement. We'll be right back after this. David, that was marvelous. Just to hear Beethoven first of all in this anniversary year, but on top of that, just to marvel at how you do these transcriptions. I mean, and I've heard so many from my student days, at Butler, to current recitals. You effortlessly play the repertoire of other instruments, probably most notably the cello, as if it were written for your instrument originally. Can you talk to us about how you approach a transcription? If you're playing it at the octave that it was actually written at, how do you do this? Make it sound so musical.
Well, I mean, musical, that's the inspiration. I mean, you're just bringing the music that's there in the piece already. But practice, it's just practice. For me, it's just hard work and practice, but I'm inspired by the music, so I will improve my technique to do that. And it's understanding the technique too. I mean, exactly how the bow works, especially when you're playing high. And there's nothing that can substitute for hours of practice. I'm working on this Beethoven, which I've performed before. So, it's bringing it back. It always feels a little more familiar every time you bring a piece you've done back again. But I'm also working on a new piece that I haven't performed. It's not new to the repertoire, just new to my fingers, which is the Saint-Saëns Cello Concerto, because I love it and I just want to do it. So I'm busting my fingers to get it just right. But it's such great music. That's what drives my technique. And because I have it up here already, I've played it so many times in the orchestra with the cello solos, and I keep going, we should play that. We should play that. But so it's up here already, and I have ideas about what I want to do with it. And it's very lyrical. So I'm just working to make it sound as beautiful and melodic as I think the music is. We'll see what happens.
Oh, it's going to be marvelous. It's an extraordinary piece. We both have an affinity for Saint-Saëns music. There's, the Third Symphony is one of my desert island pieces. I just adore it. But we're going to close our segment now because you're such a musically inquisitive person. With expanding the double bass repertoire. And these programs that you put together for your solo recitals are always brilliant. But since we're introducing the double bass in a way that maybe some people who are tuning in haven't, known before, your bigger orchestral instrument, your slightly smaller solo instrument, there's another double bass that you played, a variant of the bass family. We're going to throw this picture up here if we can. This is known as the Octabass. The Octabass it was created by Emmanuel Villaume's workshop, as I understand it. It plays an octave lower than the instrument. Can you tell us about the Octabass?
Yeah, I guess it was made in Paris. I've played it twice, and there are only a couple in the entire world. I've heard that the Montreal Symphony has one now, although I don't know what they're going to use it for. And the one I've seen, and I think, well, the one that's in the picture was from a trip to Barcelona. There was a bass workshop that I was a part of, playing a recital, not on that bass, but that bass was used in a string ensemble, and it sounded amazing. It was like the lowest notes of an organ, and you could feel them vibrating through the floor. And it just added this warmth to the bottom of the sound. It was amazing. But we all got to play with it a little bit because, I mean, it's just a novelty. I mean, it's you don't finger it like you do a regular bass because the notes are so far apart and the strings are so big. So there are little levers on the side, and you press that for each pitch that you want to play. And it has a little thing that's activated that presses like a big mechanical claw down at the top to press the strings down, press the notes down. The strings are so big that they have a bigger bow made for it. It's a little thicker wood and thicker horsehair, and you have to pull so slowly to get the sound to come out. But it's so cool because the thing just vibrates like this. I mean, it makes the regular bass seem like nothing.
Oh my goodness! I know Berlioz was singing the praises of the Octabass. I don't know how you would ever get on an airplane or how you would ever travel with something like this. You would need your own semi-truck, tractor trailer. I don't know, but it's the picture is marvelous. I laugh every time that I see it. It's just it probably feels like an earthquake when that thing gets.
Oh, it does. It does. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. So it is a real novelty. I mean, yeah, and practically speaking, it's I don't know how I think they take it apart. There was something that came apart, kind of like my travel bass, because there's no way you can even fit it through the door the size that it is.
It puts piano movie like to
Oh,
shame.
no.
You know, how would you get around to this?
Yeah.
Oh, David, it's always great to spend time with you. Thanks for sharing the Beethoven Sonata with us tonight. It's just great to hear Beethoven's music in this anniversary year. And I wish you all the best as you get set up for, return to the university here next week with Butler, with all your Butler students coming back here too. And I look forward to hopefully that moment here very soon when we're back together on the stage together playing.
Oh, I know. I look forward. This is great to see you, but I so look forward to seeing you live and in person, and all of us doing what we want to do.
And that'll be very soon, I hope. David, thanks again for everything. The rest of you, we'll see you next week on Mocktails and Masterpieces. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, David.
Matthew. Thanks, Lee.